All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Will Remington, and this is the first episode, somewhat of a beta test of the Abandoned Brothers podcast. Was hoping to have a more full setup here, but weather in Seattle dictated otherwise with some canceled flights. But the show must go on. So decided to do this over Teams, if not in person, so we could keep this rolling. With me today is my good friend, Ken Costello. He's been my friend ever since our days at the Air Force Academy together. The inspiration for this podcast is because of a topic that, for whatever reason, media, uh, generals, even vet podcasts don't seem to be touching on, even though I'm finding it incredibly commonplace. I feel like a lot of people are talking about how we have the most dire recruiting shortage ever since the end of Vietnam, or at least we did. Recent numbers seem to be on the rise. But yet, no one's talking about the problem with the recruiting process, the recruiting system, MEPS, National Guard Bureau, USAREC, the waiver processes, because from what I've seen, they don't process hardly anyone. It's like as soon as you need a waiver, it's like you're dead in the water. Recruiters don't even want to do the work, and the waiver authorities don't even want to read your packet. So, without getting too much into the weeds, I've had a lot of friends with stories that pertain to that and attest to that notion. So, starting this off, I thought of no better than my friend Ken to talk about this, since he also was with me at the Air Force Academy. And a lot of this, interestingly enough, there is even some problem with recruiting as far as first people trying to join. And yet there seems to be a much bigger problem of prior service members going back in. And so Ken's story is more of that type where he was active duty, got out for just a little bit and decided to go back into a reserve component, or at least try to. So with that, I'll stop talking and let Ken tell more of his story. I'm actually curious. Let's start before we even get into that. Like, what I know you are obviously at the Air Force Academy. What made you want to join the military in the first place? Let's get a little bit into your background.
Yeah, thanks, Will. So, what motivated me at first to get in was a sense of service, um, a sense of wanting to be part of something bigger than myself. It is a little bit cliche, I'll be honest.
Nothing wrong with
Um, yeah, and
it.
what
Even though
really,
it sounds hokey when you say it, but also that's kind of the right answer, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, and that evolved and it changed and it matured as I matured. I mean, it really started when my parents took me to an air show at 4 years old and was like, I want to fly that.
I
Fell
can
in love with
definitely remember.
aviation.
I definitely
And
remember going to a few air shows as a kid myself and being like, "Yep, I want to be up there."
yep. Um, and so when I was at the academy, I got into the soaring program, and that was my first exposure to being a pilot, and realized it really wasn't for me. Um,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
so yeah, so I went from there, looked at air liaison officer, got us, didn't make it through the pipeline, got assigned to cyber, didn't want to do that. So I went back and became a CISO. They were combining all of the 12X AFSCs, so Bombardier, Navigator, Electronic Warfare, all under one new title, same code, just different title of Combat Systems Officer.
Okay, I
So
was actually going to ask you about that because I wasn't very aware of what all a CISO was. So it was a lot of the other kind of auxiliary functions like combined into one now because is it just kind of less specialized because of how many computer systems and whatnot where you don't necessarily need like a specific shred for like a nav versus
yeah, the pipeline has changed a lot in the last 20 years, um, where it went from for years and years it was navigator and you get your nav wings and then you would branch to your platform. You get assigned your plane and you go through that pipeline. Um, and we had a lot more navigators back then. Right when I was coming into the pipeline, a little bit before I graduated in 2007, or excuse me, 2011, it they transitioned it so that way they were combining all of those rated officer positions that were not pilot and not ABM. Um, we're all going to be under one AFSC now, and they modified the pipeline to accommodate not just you did your navigation training, you learned how to get from point A to point B in a plane, but then they ran you through some other trainings of this is how you do this is how you read a radar, this is how you tune a radar, this is how you do electronic attack, this is how you shoot a harm, like really high level um stuff that kind of dabbled in a little bit of everything. Um,
Which I'm
I'll
sure
just send you
most.
the file. But I was actually in my class, no, and a classmate of ours, Kevin Dandino, made this poster, and he called it the, um, I forgot even what the acronym for the plane was, but we called it the Fear Bat because we were doing so many different things. So we took it was the F, the EA, the R for recce, B for bomber, A for attack, T for tanker. We were doing all of those things in simulators, and so
It's
we
like that.
took
It's
picture.
combined, truly multi-role aircraft.
Yes, it wasn't multi-role; it was all the roles, and it was this picture of a T1, and we took
Omni-roll.
yeah, we put Mark 84s on it. We put the antenna array off of an EC-130. We put harms on it, and we just photoshopped this T1 with just everything that we were doing. It was kind of funny.
So I'm sure 90% of the audience has no idea what a harm is. Would you be able to explain that?
Yeah, it's an anti-radiation missile, so it's a missile that seeks out ground-based radars, used in suppression of enemy air defense in order to uh, essentially blind the enemy while other air assets are in the area.
Gotcha. So it's a missile that's pretty much meant to take out SAM type sites, any type of IADs.
Right.
Um, so I'm even trying to remember what IAD stands for. Is it integrated?
Integrated air defense system.
There we go. Yep.
Yeah.
It's been a while since
Um,
my tech school, that's for sure.
yeah, yeah. Mine was a little bit more recent. But so I'm going through the CISO school pipeline now, get selected for U-28s, and that's when it really started to change for me of like why I wanted to join. It was maturing with me, right? So it went from this just like sense of service to realizing that I was now part of this long line. We talk about the long blue line, right? But it really
Sure.
materialized of thinking of it more like a rope, right? If you look at a rope, it's just a bunch of itty bitty strands. And those strands overlap and they weave together, and that's the Air Force. It's all of these individuals who spend varying amounts of time in service and do various things, but they're all woven together to make this long braid that the longer time goes on, the longer it exists. And those
It's a good
individual
metaphor.
fibers have to be strong for the rope to be strong, right?
Toward.
And I wasn't going to be a weak piece of fiber. That was kind of my mentality. I also wasn't going to remove myself from the rope until I did my duty, until I did my responsibility. Somebody had to keep that rope going, and I was going to volunteer to be a part of it. Um,
And so, and for everyone tracking this, this is after he's already gone through 4 years at the United States Air Force Academy. So it's not like he hasn't even had some time to ponder all of this. But so going U-28's kind of made it more real for you as far as like, hey, this is how it's really about to start now versus just kind of going to school. Like all that 4 years was like preparation, whereas
mhm.
now really getting into it.
Yeah, and I mean, keep in mind that when I graduated, that was achieving a lifelong goal. I had wanted to go to the academy since before I turned 5, and
Oh,
then I did it.
so the air show really was like,
It really was, yeah. It was really the air show that set me on my path, and then I did it, and then I was
okay,
like, all right, now the real work starts. Because
right.
CISO school was way harder than the academy, and the academy was brutal.
So,
Um,
and I didn't go through like UPT or any of that type of training, but I've heard that the academy is very much meant to prepare you for UPT because it is so difficult. Was that kind of a fair
yeah,
assessment? Probably fair statement.
I mean, all the rote memorization we did at the academy of quotes and facts and figures and dates and times and all that, right? Well, I got
Old
washed
face.
back yeah, boldface. I got washed back a class at CISO school because I didn't have the right stuff just memorized, and I failed the test. So I got washed back a class, so I'd have more time to study.
And how much
That's
time? I mean, to get washed back, how much time did that set you back?
3 weeks.
Okay, less than I thought it might be, but that's not a small chunk of time either.
No, but I mean, UP or UCT was graduating a class every 3 weeks. So
Okay.
that's the production line. And that was my last shot. If I failed that test again, I'm out.
What
See ya.
would so you would have been reclassed at that point,
Yeah,
or
I would have had to go find a new AFSC.
yeah, which and then your needs of the Air Force, right? You don't really even really have a choice at that matter at that
Not
point.
really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I do they still give you like a list of preferences, but they don't like
sure they
you get
do, but it's
it's
probably the five least manned or most critically manned AFSCs.
sure. I mean, my um I have an older brother who also went to the academy, and he he got all the way to initial flight screening before realizing that he actually didn't really like being a pilot as much as he thought he would. And so, getting screened out of initial flight screening, he became needs of the Air Force. And I believe that he was able to put in his preferences. And this still boggles me because he really wanted to go security forces. And I know that kind of fluctuates. Like some classes really want to go security forces and you get like overstaffed. I believe that by the time we were around, like they were actually like, hey, we need more security forces officers.
Yep.
And maybe during Marcus's, it was one of those over demanded type ones. But I think overall, security forces is very much a in demand AFSE. And even though that was his top pick, they said, nope, we're going to make you an RPA maintenance officer and send him to Creech, where they were overstaffed by CGOs by like 42% because
Yeah.
good job, AFPC. Um,
Yeah. Uh, that's the sort of shit that drives podcasts like this.
right.
Like, uh, we going through U-28s, and then assignment night comes, right? You gonna go to Cannon, or you gonna stay at Herbie? And Cannon was not the preferred base, let's say. And there were some people that were jumping up and down for it though, because they liked they didn't like the beach. They liked the mountains more. Cannon's a lot closer to the mountains, or they had family in New Mexico. There's tons of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that are super into like ranching and like
Yeah,
rodeo type stuff. And if you're that, like Cannon is the place for you.
Cannon's
Uh,
absolutely the place for that.
I one of the cooler things that I managed to arrange as a IT contractor was I had to get some servers flown from Hurlburt Field to Cannon, but these were servers that had already been hooked to classified networks, so
Mm.
therefore they need to be treated as classified material.
Hmm.
Uh, so, and it was actually some of the hoops I had to jump through just to get it approved, even though it was the obvious answer, was to actually get these servers on a 130 that's already going back and forth because they go back and forth all the time.
Hmm.
Thankfully, I had top cover of a lieutenant colonel who was the ROC director at the time, who's like, yes, like do the thing that makes sense.
Hmm.
Crazy. Whereas everyone else was like trying to throw every red flag about no, contractors can't fly on military aircraft unless it's in theater. I'm like, I'm not asking just for like space available because I don't want to pay American Airlines or United to go to Cannon. I am escorting classified material.
Right.
Like, there's very much a mission requirement for this.
Right.
But all of that is to say, once I did that, the loadmaster for that 130, he was like, "Bro, I freaking love Clovis. I want to stay here as long as possible."
Yeah.
Um, Super cool guy. I mean, he was talking about how he's into the rodeo type stuff, so it's like, yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I've actually heard some good arguments about it's like if you actually just let people decide where they want to be stationed versus just making people go where they don't want to go.
Hmm.
Um, I sometimes I feel like there's this unspoken, almost unconscious mentality of if you're not suffering, you're not serving.
Bro, let me tell you what. After getting out and seeing what life is like out here, that is 100% true. Uh,
And where are you now?
so I work for Alaska Airlines. in their ops center up in Seattle, Washington.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you went from, because you did have a stint at Herbie, right? But then did you have to go to Canon for a while?
Yeah, so I did 4 years at Herbie between training and then the line unit, and then another 2.5 years at Cannon. So 8 years active duty after the academy.
Okay. And so then you went from Clovis, New Mexico to Seattle. That was like your.
Yeah, we picked about as much as opposite of places we could from Clovis. So we're living in the city. It's wet. It's cold. Lots of trees. Yeah.
I mean, I did much the same where once I got out of the Air Force and even did like a full year as a contractor, I decided to move to LA because I wanted as opposite an experience from Clovis as possible. So
It's a good place for it. Yeah.
totally understand that.
Yeah.
Um, so let's see. I actually had forgotten that you had tried for Air Liaison Officer or ALO. How did that process go?
Yeah.
Don't mind
So
getting into that a little bit.
I yeah. So I did my ops Air Force after my freshman year at Pope, which was fantastic, and I got to that was
That's
really
that's
my
where
first.
that's where I went too, actually.
Oh, nice.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, I think yeah. Um, so yeah, I went to Pope. That was really my first exposure to AFSOC or really the special operations community directly. Like, everybody's got heard of the Navy SEALs and Green Berets, but that was my first direct exposure.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, AFSOC is certainly less well known by the public
yeah,
in general. And for people wondering, so Pope Air Force Base is pretty much an airfield enveloped entirely by Fort Liberty, previously and possibly soon to be called again Fort Bragg, depending on how much this administration pushes that. I just don't want to be the guy changing the signs. Um, but
wait until
so
you hear the price tag for changing all the letterhead.
I don't.
Hmm.
Did you ever watch the show Suits and how
Yeah,
like they have made it like a joke at the end of like we're not changing the name of
yeah,
the firm for 5 years.
yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I feel like that's what the Army is doing right now, sadly. But so because it is very much an airfield, it's very much in direct support of the Army, like in particular the 82nd Airborne. They love to say they put the air in airborne out there. So you have very much Air Force directly supporting ground operations there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I got to see the logistics side. I got to see security forces, went on a C-130 ride. So, in 3 weeks, I packed a lot in. But one of my exposures was the air liaison, or the air liaison officer position there. That was my first exposure to it. And I forget I think it's a SOSS, special, or no, AOS, Air Operations Support, something like that. I forget now.
Oh, ASOS, I think. I'm trying.
ASOS, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
Air
I
Support
remember that.
Operations Squadron.
There we go. Yep.
Yeah, so I got to go check out the ASOS there. Um, Had a great time. Was like, all right, I'm doing this. Trained for it as hard as I could. Went on
Well,
Dean's List as a result.
well, so pause. So like, let's just kind of explain what an ASOS is, because
Yeah.
ALO. I think they call them TAC-P officers now, or is it even still ALO?
No, they're on to special warfare officers now, but they're
Okay.
not special operations. That's different. They're special warfare.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
so, but in general, it's kind of meant like an ALO was meant to be like a TAC-P officer, right? And a TAC-P is what, terminal or tactical air control
Tactical air
party.
control party. Yeah.
And so think they're the guys on the ground who are embedded with Army units to call in close air support. So ALOs being like the officer for that career field.
Yeah, not just close air support, but any air support at all. So you've got the
Sure.
logistics, medevac, um, included in there as well.
Sure. I guess, yeah. Everyone thinks like the action side of things, warheads on foreheads. There'd be like the guys on the radio, like telling F-16s, B-1s, B-52s, whatever the air asset is of,
Mhm.
hey, I need you to drop bombs on these coordinates, right? Is that kind of
Mhm.
a um which yeah, I mean, which was a huge component of GWAT. It
Yeah.
was yeah.
And it's a huge component of what we're seeing in Ukraine too. You know,
Um,
the those that dominate the air, you dominate the ground. And right now, neither side has air dominance, so neither side is really making a whole lot of progress.
gotcha. And yeah, I mean, Ukraine's a whole nother can of worms. I probably
Oh
shouldn't get into with this. Um, so okay, so you went on Dean's list trying to prepare physically
No,
because that
sorry,
was
I
a very,
misspoke. Not Dean's List, AC Pro.
or I'm
Went on
sorry, right,
the
opposite
opposite of
list.
Dean's
Yeah,
List.
yeah. Uh,
Spent too much time in the gym. Was real fit. Terrible grades. So
I understand that. I had a semester like that as well.
yeah. So I couldn't balance everything. It's a tough place. That's just where I fell on the merit spectrum. Ended up actually passing the initial physical test to get into the pipeline and then washed out of the pipeline for ALO, and that was that.
Oh, but you actually went into the pipeline. I didn't know that like you got that far. Was there, I know for Crow Stow, like Special Tactics Combat Rescue, there was like the phase one process of kind of like a pre-selection before you could go. Or sorry, phase one is like submitting your packet and stuff. Phase two would be like the actual like uh assessment and selection.
Yeah.
So was there like a an assessment and selection for ALO, or did you immediately like go into the pipeline?
No, uh there was a submission process. It wasn't nearly as robust as phase one, phase two, or phase one stuff.
I
But
mean, it was I mean, it was very much in its infancy at that point, I think. So yeah,
yeah, it was pretty new. It um wasn't as an ASOS was pretty new, I should say. But the I got my packet in, got approved, made it past the PT test, and then it's a 5 day course or a 5 day pipeline selection. Got washed out. It happens.
yeah.
You
I
know,
mean,
came back humbled. Um,
I got kicked out of us, quite a few selection events myself, so I get it.
yeah. Um, and honestly, it was for the best. Um, I talked to my buddies who did make it through that exact same screener, and had a career in the ASOS, and it wasn't everything that I had romanticized it to be.
Sure.
So
Okay.
it worked out. It worked out for the best.
Yeah, I mean, I had my academy roommate's younger brother became an ALO. He didn't go the academy route; he was ROTC, but I know he was an absolute just physical specimen. So, uh, and he eventually got out of the career field because he felt very much overworked and underappreciated. So, not sure really details beyond that, but the fact that he left in fairly short order kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm curious. I feel like with Stowe, Crow, Alo, there's a lot of it of like you can't spell officer without office.
Mhm.
And so, were your friends, were they somewhat frustrated by not being able to actually do the job versus like yelling at their guys to fill out their DTS vouchers after they do the job?
Yeah. My Stowe buddy was actually exactly that way.
Okay.
My ALO buddy was he went to an armor unit. And armor doctrine is essentially if I can see it, I can kill it. If I can't see it, it can't kill me, therefore I don't care.
Okay.
So that didn't really leave a whole lot of room for things like interdiction, right? Sending in planes beyond the sight of the front line to destroy units before they get to the front line.
Mm,
Um, Armor just doesn't believe in that. And so he had a lot of frustrations trying to integrate with armor when the mentality was if I can see it, I can kill it. What do I need planes for?
wow.
Right.
It's kind of funny to think that like you would have those issues with that type of integration at this point because so much of everything is joint now. But that's I feel like a remnant of the whole like just older army doing army stuff, Air Force doing Air Force stuff type mentality,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
As opposed to doing things like, I don't know, sending out your Bradleys out ahead. You use them for scouting anyways. Designate targets and let's drop some warheads on foreheads. That way you never have to get into an engagement zone in the first place.
So when I was at Pope, I wasn't assigned or like given a tour of the ASOS or anything. I didn't even know what an ASOS was at that
Yeah.
point. I did get to meet and hang out with some combat controllers at the time, but I had no idea what an ASOS was, and it makes me wonder if I had, that might have completely changed my whole life trajectory at this point. So,
Yeah.
pretty wild.
No.
So, okay, so you went ALO at that point. You were then reclassed to CISO, like where your needs of the Air Force, or are they
I got
based
reclassed to
CISO?
cyber for a moment.
Oh, okay. How did you get out of that?
Um, so the way the program worked at the time is you could go from non-rated to rated AFSEs, and I talked to
Oh,
my
okay.
commander, and
Or rated were just given higher priority that way, right?
yeah, yeah. So like you couldn't volunteer out of a rated slot to go non-rated, but you could go the other direction.
Sure.
So yeah, talked to my commander, said, "Hey, I want to get on the list," and then like 2 weeks later, I got my assignment changed to CISO.
Yeah, I don't. I picture you making being a happier CISO than a cyber officer. So
Yeah, I tried to, I really tried to make the best of it. I was like, okay, we'll do this. Cyber's the cutting edge, and it'll set me up well for the outside when I get out in 5 years because I'm not doing this for 20. Uh,
yeah, that's the same type of mentality I had towards Intel. I was like, okay, let's make the most of this.
yeah, no, CISO was absolutely the way to go for me though.
Slowly dying inside. Let's make the most of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so but did and I might be thinking of Grant, who told me about like an instructor who was like a U-28 pilot, or did you have an influence like that of getting you onto that platform?
Yeah, so our AOC, the commander of a cadet squadron, um, he's a major. He was an AC-130 FOCO, and um, well, I was just chatting with him one day, and he was leaving the academy the same year we were graduating, so we were just talking about where he was going next, and he goes, "Well, I'm going to U-28s." I was
Okay.
like, "What's that?" He goes, "Well, I can't really tell you." It's like, hmm,
Piques your
okay.
interest on.
Uh, why do they need a fire control officer? Well, I can't really tell you that either. Mm-hmm.
Just
Okay. Well, what
asking
did they
little
do?
obvious questions.
Yeah. What did they do? What's the plane do? Like, what does it look like? He goes, can't really talk about it. He's like, sign me up. I'm done. I'm sold. I want to fly that plane. Nothing else. Let's go. That was my influence, and my life is these little snippets of like very concise moments where it completely changed. Getting
I mean,
taken to an air show at
that's
4 years
everyone's
old.
life, right? When you get to go back and look in hindsight, it's like, wait, where were the turning points? Yeah.
That was a turning point. There's that conversation right there, and that at that point forward, everything was dedicated to going U-28s.
And obviously that was such a gamble. You basically were like, you're like at the end of a game show and you're like, I'll take the mystery box. Like, and it actually paid off.
Yeah, and like I had said, like that was kind of part of that change. The beginning, I think, the beginning of that change, where my mentality went from like general service, being part of something bigger than myself, like no, I'm going to do the hard things that nobody else can or wants to do because I'm capable. Therefore, I will make myself want to, and I will go do have this. I don't know. Part of it is I didn't want to live with any regret. I wanted to go out there and do the hard shit and do the things that I, couldn't still can't talk about and go do.
So,
I wanted to go do all that because it was, I don't know, to me, like there's a significant amount of sacrifice to that, and I was willing and able to make the sacrifice. Therefore, I had a duty to.
so you were willing to put service before self, and strive for excellence. So it sounds like you clearly joined for the worst, most nefarious and selfish reasons. And uh, what I find hilarious is because there are absolutely the people who join just purely for the benefits.
Yeah,
They're like, hey, I want education paid for, I want healthcare,
yeah,
um, and not necessarily to knock those people because there's a reason we offer those benefits. It is
yeah,
compensation, get people to join.
yeah,
But as far as uh, kind of grading, the ideally we want people who actually have that mentality, who actually want to serve for the right reasons, who want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, to actually give something back to their country. And Yeah, I feel like that's pretty well established with you. And for people who couldn't quite catch my reference earlier, the core values of the Air Force are integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. So I was making a slide reference to that. Um, I'm curious to talk more about your record as a CISO, because CISO being like that type of mission, you're like, I can't tell you about it. You were always a consummate professional as far as OPSEC, honestly, better than me, which is sad since I was the intel officer. So if I ask you a question, obviously, please feel free to parry and be like, no, I can't talk about that one.
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't mean to try to step on that. So, but can you kind of talk about more generally what a U-28 does for the warfighter and the type of warfighter that you were supporting?
Yeah, sure. So we did intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance for special operations. We were the eyes in the sky for the guy on the ground. We were also out there doing a lot of collection. So beyond just directly supporting troops, we were also kind of gathering tactical intelligence for um, what, where are the targets that we're going after that are of um, importance to the special operations like going on in that area. So sometimes we acted independently as a single ship. Sometimes we were with other assets. Sometimes we were with ground troops. It was very dynamic. Um, it was very challenging. It was a lot of applying concepts, not checklists. So it was very checklist driven until you got on station, and then after that, you had kind of governing principles, and from
Sure.
there, you were expected um, to discern what was going to happen. And we couldn't brief every moment of our flight. Like, I remember going through CISO school, every moment of the flight from the time that you put your G suit on to the time you took it off, every moment was scripted. Um, we couldn't do that. There would
You
be
had G
times,
suits in U-28s?
no, well, in T6s going through
Oh,
CISO
gotcha.
school.
Right, right. Okay.
Um, but with U-28s, we'd send we'd on more than one occasion, we'd do our normal brief. Here's your target. Here's where you're going. Here's your grid. Here's your freak. Have fun.
I was
We
about to
go
say,
sit.
right, if you needed a G suit in a U-28, I was like, that those sounds like a lot more fun to ride than I thought they were.
No, no, no,
Yeah.
no. No, you need piddle packs in the U-28.
Yeah. You're up there for a
So
while.
yeah. So I mean, on more than one occasion, we'd go through the whole brief, and we'd be sitting on the ground, and they'd be like, "All right, your target just changed. Here's your new grid. Here's your new freak. Go." And I
Sure.
would just have to, and it'd be like,
I
we're
mean,
taking the active runway, and I'd have to tell the pilot, "Hey, we're getting retasked. I'll tell you later about it." And I'm sitting there in the back, just like punching in grids and adjusting radios and coming up with a new sensor plan. And here we go. Um,
I mean,
and
on
the
the
pilots would be taking off. Like they're worried about taking off right, paying attention to the safety of flight of the aircraft. And we'd hit 6,000 feet, 7,000 feet, and they'd be like, "All right, Sizzle, what do you got for us?" And I was like, "Turn heading 180. Here we go."
well, and it's actually kind of interesting to me because when I hear about that, there's definitely some overlap in our jobs where me being the intel guy for MQ9s and RPAs, and but same idea of being like, hey, like I'm messaging the pilot and sensor operator. It's like you need to go over here now.
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah,
Yeah, so 5 deployments of that, 1,600 hours in the plane, became an instructor, um, then got put on a staff gig at the wing out at Cannon doing exercise planning. That was fantastic. Getting to
was
work with, oh yeah, I absolutely loved it. Um,
I think you're one of the few, which is good that you actually like made the most of it.
yeah, well, I say that I loved it, and that's important to the story, right? Because that feeds into why I pursued what I pursued on the reserve side and the guard side too. So
Okay.
I was kind of done flying. I hit my fifth deployment, and on the third day,
Wait, hang on. You had 5 deployments?
yeah,
Okay, so across how many years?
four,
And so was each deployment what, like 3, 4 months?
3 months.
3 months. Yep.
I mean, it's 3 months in theater, and then you have like 2 weeks of movement on each side. So
Sure. And because I mean, Air Force deployments and especially even just Spec Ops deployments tend to be more frequent but shorter stints versus like, conventional Army who would deploy for like a year at a time. Yeah.
right, yeah, and um the 3 months was based on hours limits. So you have to hit, you can't exceed 330 hours in 90 days, and usually we were bumping up right against that. So
Interesting. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, those and that's a side of the Air Force that I just really don't know about. Unfortunately, didn't get to experience as much as I wanted to.
yeah.
Um, so 5 deployments. Can you say to which countries that you went to?
Uh, two to Afghanistan, two to East Africa, one to Iraq.
Okay. Uh, man. So for some reason I was thinking you had less deployments than that, so all the more so. And I mean, while you're there, you are supporting like kind of truly tip of the spear operations with Spec Ops, um, supporting tier one assets, correct?
We supported a lot of the people from across the special operations community.
Okay. And so, I mean, those people expected you to perform at a high level, or else the those customers, as you were, the supported units, kind of get their say of who supports them
Hmm.
to a large degree.
Hmm.
And so if you suck, they would be like, we don't want this squadron from Hurlburt. We don't want this squadron from Cannon anymore. Correct.
It wasn't so much squadron because the talent was actually pretty well spread across the squadrons. But they'd start handpicking names.
So all the more so.
Yeah.
So where like they can be that even granularly selective. Um, and the reason I bring that up is that obviously it speaks to your intrinsic need to be good at your job to actually be a professional. So the
Yep.
fact that you were going back, clearly were never deselected, as it were. You were never told like, "Hey, we don't want that guy coming back."
No, and there was guys like that they would only fly. We call them the fluff lines because you'd go in and fluff the pillow for the next guy. Um, it would be middle of the night when nothing's going on. You're just staring at a building. It's kind of where we stuck all of our less talented operators.
Yeah,
Um, Not to say that they were bad, but there's a pecking order, and that's typically where we put our less talented guys.
sure. I mean, yeah, because it's pretty hard in the military to be outright fired at your job, but you will be
Mhm.
reassigned to more menial duties typically, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
and we saw what happened. I remember very distinctly my introduction to the community was a video from an op that went wrong that friendlies got killed in because the CISO didn't do his job. Um, and then again later where a high profile target was missed um, because the CISO tracked the wrong person because the intelligence collection coordinator told them to follow the wrong person, and the CISO didn't have the maturity to go, "No, you're wrong. I'm doing what's right."
oh,
Uh,
so the oh man, I'm trying to remember acronyms now.
ITC.
ITC, right? So the ITC was the one telling him, "Hey, look over here," and he didn't be like, "No, you've got it wrong,"
Yeah, the ITC said, "Hey, follow that person, the target," but the target went that way.
which is kind of nuts. I mean, a lot of ITCs are like senior airmen or even like they're not necessarily the most oldest experienced bunch when they get their deployments.
Yeah, I honestly I never met a whole lot of ITCs, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I am speaking somewhat third-hand information here because I was assigned to the 56 Special Operations Intelligence Squadron at Cannon. You had the rough equivalent of that at Hurlburt, the 11th SOAS, and a
Hmm.
lot of the ITCs would get picked out of that squadron.
Hmm.
Yeah, I won't go into a rabbit hole with that one. But my understanding is that some ITCs, it's like you have the ones who are truly experienced, Even kind of I do know one thing I can absolutely say as far as canon is that we reserved the ITC deployments for the enlisted side, whereas officers were collection managers.
Sure.
By
Yeah.
by and large, every once in a while, an officer got like an ITC slot, but it was rare. It would be if for some reason we couldn't have an enlisted do it, which is obviously not often. So that was the way they tried to delve it up, which I know even when I was there, I was like, I would much rather be an ITC than a collection manager, but you don't get
Yeah.
your say in that.
Yeah.
So um, I actually, yeah, I can only imagine being the CISO who was responsible for the civilian casualties, collateral damage. That would be hard to live with. And all the more so again, like, but also helps paint the picture of like why your job is important.
Mhm.
And I know I've heard you talk about that in other discussions. A lot of people think that we almost just drop bombs indiscriminately, and certainly on the AFSAC side, the amount of effort and processes that we would go through to actually avoid collateral damage, avoid civilian casualties. I imagine that was a huge component of your job, correct?
Absolutely. And I can't emphasize enough how much effort goes into it. It's not like the movies. It's 100 times more effort. We were to the point where there was one road that we were striking vehicles on, and there was there's buildings on the other side of the road, kind of sporadically spaced out. And it was getting to the point where these vehicles are moving at a high rate of speed. When you hit them with a missile, they don't instantly stop. And we were picking out um, where we could hit without the vehicle hitting a building after it had been blown up. Like,
Okay.
yeah, just very, just
The
tons of effort.
the precision that we were able to actually get down to. Yeah.
And it was, I mean, it's not even that. It's just the effort,
Well, that
right?
too.
Like, you got to map out this whole route and tell me how far will this vehicle probably go without hitting a building. It
Right.
just, we were focused so much on making sure that we were only hitting what we wanted to hit.
So, I mean, it sounds like you were good at your job is kind of what I'm getting to. And even if you weren't necessarily the top performer, you were far from being bottom of the barrel. Uh,
Yeah, not everybody made instructor. It took me a little bit, so I definitely wasn't a top performer, but I did, not everybody made instructor, and I did.
so you did about 4 years at Hurlburt, 4 years at Canon,
2 years of Canon. Yeah, so
2 years.
it was like a year and a half of training
Right.
at
Okay.
Pensacola, 4.5 years at Herbie, and then 2 years at Canon.
Okay. So all right, you got the lion's share near the beach. Good for you.
Yeah.
Um, uh, what made you decide to get out at that point? Because you said you liked working, doing like the exercises, right? And you were actually what went from that was your last job before you got out.
Yeah. So I was actually able to extend that to an 18-month assignment because normally that's only a 12-month assignment at the wing. Um, and then you have to go back to the line unit and start deploying again. The reason I got out was simple: it was burnout. The ops tempo when your deployments are your break, because all you have to do is wake up, fly, gym tan laundry, and then repeat. There's no social hour. There's
That sounds
no
nice.
TDYs. There's no professional military education. That's all you do. You fly for 8 days. You sit the desk for a day, and then you have a day off for 3 months. It's great. That's your break.
So deployments were your reprieve because you
Yes.
just were given so much crap to do at home.
Yeah,
Was
because
it
when you're home, you've got you got family, you got friends, you got vacation, you got PME, you've got upgrade courses to go from co-pilot to aircraft commander to instructor to evaluate. Like, everybody's got all these things that we're doing.
so life is
Um,
simpler? Sure, that makes sense.
yeah, and
Deploy
nobody's
downright
doing nobody's cooking your food for you. You know.
right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, being at home was a lot more work than being deployed. Uh, and after doing that for so long, I was burnt out. even with the staff tour. The staff tour was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of travel, doing site surveys and running exercises. Um, and it was tough. And the thought of going back to more hours in the plane, more deployments, uh, just wasn't appealing. And I didn't want to go back to Hurlburt either. Didn't really enjoy Hurlburt.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, you're not a beach boy like myself. You and Pete. I remember you and Pete complaining about how you wanted to be at the mountains when I was visiting you there in training, and I was already at Clovis at that point, so I wanted to just strangle both of you. Um,
Yeah. I mean, there's the reason I live in Seattle now. I get cold weather, beautiful mountains,
and
trees.
that
It's great.
and that was part of the reason you even got out, right? I forget, like you had visited Seattle for some reason and just fell in love with the place.
Yeah, we were looking for the next place to live, and it was narrowed down essentially between like Boise, Colorado, Denver, Portland, and Seattle. And yeah, we came and checked out. I mean, we knew Denver. I
Sure.
had seen Boise. I went to Boise on an exercise, and then we came to Seattle, and it was just it's amazing here. I thoroughly love it.
Okay. And so what you pretty much even picked the location before you thought about the job. Because a lot of people obviously have to
Yeah.
like they find the job and that determines where they live, right? Um, you were like, no, I will find something to do in Seattle.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so
Because
what
I
was
mean, my time in the Air Force was dictated by the opposite. It was pick a job, and then it was pick the plane, and then find out where you're going to live. And
right?
I was done with that. I was over
Right.
it.
You were gonna pick where you were gonna live and figure it out from there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So once you did get out and move to Seattle, what was, I guess, how long was it before you started looking at going into like a reserve component or coming back in?
So it was actually before I even got out. I went out, talked to
And
my
that's
recruiter.
most people when they look at
Yeah.
some type of transition that way.
Yeah. So I talked to the recruiter, got my name on the scroll, found a unit that was going to take me, um, put in all the paperwork for it, came
And
back with a
that's
rejection letter.
so is it Palace Chase or Palace Front is where you go from
Alice
just
front. Yeah.
right over to guard.
Yeah, no break-in service is a Palace front. Palace Chase is essentially the guard buys out some of your active duty commitment.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, guard or reserve, I should say.
Uh,
Um,
so okay, so you went through, you actually I'm not familiar really with how that process goes for like Palace Front. So you went through all the steps and you were trying to get to the rejection, but like this is after you already found a unit.
yep.
Like how does that go? Is because with the guard, you kind of almost interview with the unit that you want to go to, right? They're kind of selective about how they go to. It's not like active duty where they kind of get who
Yeah, and
they're given.
it's the same thing with guard and reserve, same process. So I went through it, found a unit that was going to take me out of St. Louis, and um,
So would you have just commuted from Seattle to St. Louis for this type of job?
yep, yeah, and they were good with rather than doing 1 week a month, 2 weeks a year. It was still the 2 weeks a year, but it was 4 days every 2 months. So I was able to
Yeah, and I've heard
compound
of other
it.
people doing that, that they are flexible a lot that way. Because I don't think a lot of people realize that. I mean, a joy of the guard is that you kind of get to pick where you live, but like a lot of people don't actually live where their unit is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I we go through the process, and I get a letter back from Reserve Medical saying that I am unfit for duty. And that was all the information.
Okay. And for reserve medical, meaning was this like National Guard Bureau or how what was the level
No,
of
it
the
was like it was like MEPS for the reserves, for the Air Force reserves.
so because I thought like isn't it all just consolidated now? Everything's MEPS. I
It might be. I don't remember. I'm not super familiar with that. All I had was this letter from a doctor at AFP. It was either AFPC or something like that. I don't even remember nowadays. And it
I
just
mean, because
said,
I mean, this has been a while. What year was this for time frame?
this would have been like late 2018, early 2019.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, because I started the process of getting out a year prior to my separation in July of 2019.
Okay. So you
Yeah.
go through this, and part of the process is that you have to be medically cleared. Now, I'm actually even a little bit more surprised. So you're not even out yet, and they're telling you that you're not medically cleared, even though you're still active duty.
My deployment folder is green. I could deploy. I am deployment ready medically, and they are telling me that I am unfit for duty.
And they don't even say why, just
No,
denied.
it was just denied. So I took it to my recruiter, and I
Okay.
took my entire medical packet from the day I in processed with the Air Force Academy to today, and I handed it to the chief flight surgeon, the boss at Canon, and was like, "Can you look through this and tell me why I could possibly
Be
be
denied.
unfit for duty from the reserves?" Because I knew the response letter was going to take forever. So
Yeah. And
my
everything does. Unfortunately, I feel like timelines just get longer and longer with the bureaucracy.
yeah, so my recruiter sends an email back, and I send a letter saying I need more explanation. I'm deployment ready. I've never even been on a medical review board. I like I don't even have
Did
a
you even
failed
have? Did you
PT
even have?
test.
Right? Did you even have an injury, anything like that?
At this point, I had started to kind of set myself up for the transition out, and I had sought therapy, physical therapy for my neck.
Okay.
Um,
Which
which,
explain
but I
that.
was
Explain to the audience how tall you are.
Yeah, so I'm 6'4" in a tiny little plane. If you look up a picture of a U-28 or a Pilatus PC-12, it's tiny. And so yeah, I've got 1,600 hours crammed into a tin can that I'm too big for, and it
Yeah.
screwed up my neck.
What was your typical seating posture in the U-28?
This,
So
in a very uncomfortable chair. So
so yeah, I could say you might actually have some neck issues from that.
yeah,
And even then, but
um,
not irrecoverable neck issues, but it's like, hey, let's actually work on that. Let's do some physical therapy. Let's get some,
yeah,
yeah,
and it was completely manageable with regular care. So it's
right,
not like,
regular
and
care,
even yeah,
some TLC, yeah.
yeah. Um, So we get the response letter back, and it's because when I was going through CISO school, their policy at the time was that if you get actively airsick 3 times, you have to go to the Barony chair. The Barony chair is this medieval torture device where it's just a seat that they buckle you into on ball bearings, and it just spins you around. And they have you put your head in different positions to that are oriented with your vestibular tubes in your ear, and they purposefully make you dizzy, airsick. You kind of screw with your vestibular tubes so that you can learn how to fight the nausea.
Wow. So wait, you went through that?
Yep.
That sounds pretty miserable.
Yeah, it was. And it didn't really help. I still got airsick.
I will, yeah, okay. But I mean, a lot of people get airsick in training, right? It's very, I
Yeah.
mean, common for people to initially get through that, but I mean, it's also
And
very common for people to get over the initial air sickness, right?
yeah, and mine was only in very specific cases. High temperatures, turbulence, which only really ever happened during you only hit regular turbulence on low levels.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Um, And so, I mean, we could go up and do all the yanking and banking and twisting and turning you want. It never bothered me. But when it got hot and bumpy, I got
I'm
sick.
very much the same way. Uh,
Yeah, and the
G's
training
don't bother me,
included,
but just the jostling around. It's like, ooh, yeah,
yeah, and the training included advice that on the T6, they have an OBOGS system, which I forget what the acronym is, but it's an oxygen generator. And so I went to 100% oxygen rather than normal whenever I flew from that point. Once I went to the Barony chair on, because that's what the medical professionals advised. And
okay,
I had multiple IPs yell at me for it because if you turn your OBOGs to 100%, it turns the pilot's OBOGs to 100% too. And so when he's going through his checks and he sees that it's at 100%, he goes, "No, that's not what the checklist says." I was like, "Yes, I understand that, sir, but that's what the Barony chair training said is to go to 100%. Costs nothing. It
right.
costs
And
nothing."
if anything, would make the pilot feel even better, right?
Right. OBOGs is not it's not an oxygen tank, it's an oxygen generator. It's unlimited.
Okay, okay, and that's I was gonna be one of my questions.
Yeah. But because that's not what the checklist said, I got yelled at, and so sure enough, I got sick on those flights.
Checklist mentality is one of those military pitfalls, unfortunately.
Well, you gotta have a better written checklist. But uh
Or actually
anyways,
be able to think for yourself dynamically. But
there's that. Um so fast go back forward to me getting out. I get the letter saying that it's because I was airsick during CISO training.
and this is
From
this is through the help of the med group at Canon. So you have like some like head honcho medical officer at Canon who
No,
was
they
looking
didn't
for this, or
identify it. They looked through all my medical records and they did not identify it. The response letter we got from the
oh, so,
reserves.
so you had to wait for the response letter because Canon Medical was just like, I see nothing. I don't
Right,
understand this. Okay,
right. And they came back and said it's because you got airsick. And we challenged that and said that doesn't make any sense. Can you make an exception to just do desk duty? Because the reserve unit I was looking at was it was they were standing up a new AFSC that already doesn't exist anymore, and it was um permanent PAOC duty. So they took rated officers that had prior flying experience but didn't want to fly anymore, and they stuck them in op centers to go run the air war. It's perfect. You alleviate rated officers who want to stay in the cockpit from having to do a 365 to the deed or wherever else,
sure.
where they lose the qualification in the plane. So when they go back to their plane, they have to go through retraining.
Okay.
And you're identifying the people who don't want to fly anymore but have the experience you need in a KAOC.
So that actually makes way too much sense. Is that why it was kinked?
I have to imagine that's why, yes. But no, it was perfect. Like it was a great setup. And um there was a reserve unit out of St. Louis that I was going to go to. It would have been really rough. They deployed to Hawaii. That's their 2 weeks a year as they deploy to Hawaii. So, um, sacrifices of the military life. So,
Guard hard, everyone.
yeah, exactly. So they came back and said, fine, we'll approve that. We'll approve you for desk duty only.
Okay.
And I was like, that this still makes no sense, but fine, if you insist.
Okay. Wait, so I'm actually almost amazed that they were trying to be that reasonable. They actually did say, we'll approve you for desk only duty.
Yes.
So what happened from there?
So what happened from there was I got out, and the reserves and the guard are uh, they're very temperamental with budgets. So like if they don't have a slot for you, too bad. So I had only kind of began the process with this unit. I didn't have a slot. They were like, yeah, if you get approved for everything, we'll take you and you can go to the next step and interview. And if we like you, we'll hire you. I was like, okay, great. So I was not a sure thing into this unit before I got out. I get out,
Okay.
things kind of change. COVID happens. Nobody knows what's going on. Everything kind of grinds to a halt.
Yeah. COVID were not great times.
No. So fast forward 2 years. I now have a 2 year break in service. Uh, the unit hits me up and is like, "Hey, we got a slot for you. Awesome, but we need to go re-up um
Right.
your physical."
If you have more than a 12-month break in service, you have to go through the physical again.
Right.
I learned that through my own process. Like if you separate and you go back in within 12 months, it's you're current on your old medical. Yeah.
Yeah. So and not just the standard like MEPS medical, but I had to go get my rated officer
Sure. But
physical.
I mean, but yeah, I think everything is considered current within 12 months. After
Yeah.
12 months, you're a pumpkin. You have to start over. Yeah.
Yep. So they get me set up. I get an appointment at Right Pat. I've bought my tickets. I've got family out there, so I was going to stay with them. I've booked my rental car, and I'm going to leave it's like January 3rd or something like that. So right after New Year's. I forget the exact date, but it was sometime between Christmas and New Year's. I get an email that says it's dated like early November, and it says, "Oh, you're coming in as a CISO. You've been scheduled for a pilot physical. CISO physicals are handled by the home unit, so you need to go through your home unit. We've canceled your appointment." They knew for 2 months that my appointment was canceled, and they didn't tell me until like a week before I left.
Yep. Okay.
And I know that there's a difference between pilot and CISO physicals, but it's like one test. There's not it like it's not that big a deal. And I
Right.
already have the slot. Just let me take it. Nobody's gonna fill a slot in 5 days. That slot's gonna go unfilled.
But also, so
Nope.
if they had actually just done their job correctly, they would have already just directed you properly to the right physical. Yeah.
Right. They wouldn't have scheduled me on the first place 6 months prior.
Right. Okay.
They would have, yeah. So
So
the first
wasted
error
your time
was,
and their time.
yep. So the first error was they didn't check the paperwork to see what I was getting scheduled for. And then the second error was they caught it 2 months prior, which they could have filled it. Great. But then they didn't tell me for almost 2 months until the last minute where I had to cancel everything. And at that point, I was like, this is why I got out. It's this level of just incompetence and laziness and I don't even put it on this on the people that are running the system. I put it on the people that designed and maintain the system. Because being out now after 5 years and even see and I don't want to hear the government argument because I see how the VA runs. The VA is fantastic out here.
Okay. Good to hear.
So I won't even entertain it's a government. Oh, that's just a government problem. No, it's not.
No, I hate that. That's such a cop out. I've heard so many times, especially when I was trying to go Army Guard. It's just like it's the Army, William. I'm like, that means they have a right to be stupid. Like
Right.
you're just lowering expectations that far, where you just expect things to not make sense,
Right.
and then you wonder why they don't make sense and why that's just a continual loop.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm done. I told my recruiter, like, forget it. I don't want to do this. This is why I got out. And he's
From
like,
from them saying like, hey, you can't come do this physical. You were tired of jumping through hoops at that point.
yeah. And not even at that point. It was, the 14 years prior to that where I was just like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
It's just so
So
many
you
hoops to jump through, so many redundancies, so many inefficiencies. And that's why I laugh just so hard when people tell me that the military is a meritocracy. No, it's not. It's a bureaucracy.
yes,
Like,
100%.
do you know how rigorous of a board I had to go through to make second lieutenant? None.
Well,
It was time in service.
well, well. Second lieutenant was the Air Force
Oh,
Academy.
sorry, first lieutenant. You're right. To get
Right.
promoted out
Yeah.
of second lieutenant.
I'd
And
say
then
second
again,
lieutenant was pretty rigorous, I suppose, but
yeah, don't get a DUI and have a pulse.
yes,
Like,
yeah, that's first
just,
lieutenant. Yeah,
yeah, that's first lieutenant. Even
your your
captain.
bar your bar turns blue, and that's it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Marines joke that when you go, I forget what their basic infantry training is, but their joke is that by the time that your ruck wears off the brass on your butter bar is the time that you put on first lieutenant and it's already silver, so you're fine.
I like
That's
that.
all it takes.
Or yeah,
Time and service.
right.
So I laugh that it's a meritocracy. It's not. I've seen what a real meritocracy looks like now. Um,
In your
I've
current
seen. Sorry.
in your current employment or
Yeah.
elsewhere. Okay.
No, I mean, I've seen what office politics looks like because I was a contractor for a while, so I bounced around a couple different companies, which was fantastic to get a lot of experience around. So I was
Experience
like a
perspective. Yeah.
staffing contractor.
Yeah.
Um, and I've seen what a real meritocracy is, and boy, the military ain't it.
I mean, that kind of talks about like checklist mentality. Because I get where placing a lot of the blame on the people who design the system. I do still place a
Yeah.
lot of blame on the people who run the system because they refuse to think for themselves. They have to follow the checklist. By God, like this process says this, and they won't make
Mhm.
exceptions or think of like, wait, this scenario, this situation doesn't necessarily follow the checklist. Therefore, I need to not follow the checklist exactly.
Mhm. No,
Um,
I still question if I was ever really in the military because U-28s are the redheaded stepchild of AFSOC. AFSOC is their redheaded stepchild of the Air Force, and the Air Force is the redheaded stepchild of the military. I guess now we have the Space Force, but
yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know about redheaded stepchild. More like the geeky brother that the big brother picks on, being the army. I don't
yeah.
know. Mixing
But
metaphors here.
I mean, I remember going through the academy and being told like, process and checklists and all that, and then going to first day in U-28s and seeing it posted on a safety bulletin in the men's bathroom above the urinal that said, if you come across a process that you don't understand why it is that way, and the best answer you can find is that's just the way we've always done it, you're wrong. Find out why, and if it doesn't make any more sense, change it.
And that's the culture that should be fostered. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
whether even in, I mean, honestly, in basic training, you're taught to react and just follow orders in that could even be very absurd orders in an absurd situation. And if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't matter, just do it. It's almost to where it's like thinking for yourself is not just not encouraged, it's actively discouraged,
And
unfortunately.
now, and it's funny in my current position, like I see both sides now, where being in an industrial job, and the military is roughly an industrial job.
Sure.
I see how important process is and following the process exactly,
Sure.
because our process on the airline side is truly written in blood. It's either written because somebody got hurt, or uh, in some cases, it's written in money, and that's just a really costly mistake that you can make. It's
Sure.
like it was in the news recently that a Delta flight had to cancel because the door was not disarmed and the escape slide blew when they opened the door to like access the jet bridge. They didn't disarm it, and the escape slide blew up, or it inflated. Like nobody got hurt. It's not dangerous. There's no blood involved. But that's
But
those. But those things are like $25,000 a pop,
yeah.
right?
that's
So
that's
why
an
do we
end
have a
and
why
budget.
do we have a process that's so strict about how we disarm the door and approach the gateway? And there's a whole knock procedure and thumbs up through the window. Like it's super scripted.
Right. It's super scripted, but it actually makes sense for the situation. And
Exactly.
that's what I'm getting at is knowing to be able to distinguish between the two. And that's where
Exactly.
a lot of people falter. Go ahead.
Give me 1 second. I gotta get my charger. Sorry.
Okay. I figure we can either fast forward or splice that out. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Mm. Okay. So I want to recap a little bit. So you were go through the Air Force Academy, which is no small feat and no small time of government funded training, education, etc. You go through all of CISO school, which is how long?
A year.
A year. You then spend uh, 8 years active duty service time with 5 deployments in support of some of the top performers, some of the most lethal units that the military has to offer, where they're able to hand pick you if they don't like you, you'll be gone. Going after then like their missions are some of the most politically sensitive and uh, prioritized. These are presidential and SecDef level approved targets and missions.
Hmm.
You decide to get out, but even go through the process of trying to just go directly in to where you don't necessarily have to get revamped medically.
Yeah.
You're still green on your medical, like you're deployable.
Yep.
And the entity, I'm still curious what entity it was exactly that rejected you. Um,
It was
whether,
it was like medical. It was the Reserve Medical Board or something like that.
okay.
Yeah.
Do you even, uh, do you still have that letter of where they, because at first it was just you're denied, no explanation given,
Right.
right? Um, we don't have to tell you why we denied you type of attitude, right?
Yeah.
Which that alone fucking kills me. Probably shouldn't drop F bombs, but that one is warranted.
Yeah.
Uh, because that it's obviously it even just seems like a capricious denial. Because I even get so annoyed by that when I had people in my own process tell me it's like, well, they don't have to give you an explanation. It's like, well, then how do you know that it's a legitimate explanation or not?
Or yeah. I mean, even just something as benign as like, oh, you don't have all the records. There's a piece of paper missing, a waiver was missing, a letter from the commander, something.
Something. But yeah, I mean, how can you tell the difference between a legitimate denial and a capricious denial if they don't even have to give their rationale?
Hmm. Or just a clerical error. Oh, this isn't the right Kenneth Costello. This is
Right.
these social security numbers don't match.
Oh yeah. I mean, in my process, it's like we can't take you because you have a VA disability rating. It's like, can you tell me more about that rating considering I never filed with the VA?
Right.
Never got a response back. I had to send an official like sworn statement saying that I never filed with the VA.
Yeah.
And then they finally moved things along.
Yeah.
Uh, so, but then at first the letter just says, you're denied. We don't have to explain our reasons. You finally are. How did you get that? Was it just kind of an appeal, like a request to get the
Yeah.
explanation?
It was a response back through my recruiter that was at the reserve recruiter who was at Canon.
Okay. Right. So yeah, there's specific recruiters for a reserve component this way.
Yep.
And in that letter, it explains we're not taking you because you got airsick during your CISO training.
Right. 8 years prior.
And it actually like said, do you happen to still have that letter?
Sure, I do somewhere.
Okay, I hope so.
Yeah, me too. It was ridiculous.
Keep the receipts.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like to have that level of just hard evidence of ridiculousness. Like I was so intrigued to interview you because your story isn't necessarily long per se as far as trying to get in. It's pretty short, but wanted to give that your backstory because I want to talk about like the amount of money that's been invested in you to be this level of operator. I just like before this interview, I Googled how much the Air Force Academy alone is valued at. And on usafa.edu, it approximates each cadet is spent about $416,000.
Yep.
I don't even have no clue how much CISO training costs. All of your just
About
experience of 8 years.
about 1.5 for CISO training, probably another 400K for U-28 specific training.
And you're proven. It's not like, oh, like it's not like you're still an unknown element. Like, maybe we can let him in. Maybe he'll get over his air sickness. You've already been deployed 5 times,
1,600 hours in the plane.
1,600 hours. There's no question that you got over any said air sickness and that it wasn't an issue in an actual operational environment.
Right.
They come back say, no, we can't take you because you got air sick 8 years prior during training.
That's it.
And that's what this is what
While
we
another medical professional looked through my file, the entire thing, including the records about getting airsick, and said, "Nope, this isn't an issue."
right. So he couldn't even find it, or at least I guess he probably saw it, but just didn't flag to him, right, that it would be an
No,
issue.
I specifically asked. I specifically asked her, like, is it because I went to the barony chair during CISO training? She said, no, that wouldn't exclude you. You've got 8 years in the plane. Why would that kick you out?
So there was someone with common sense, but that wasn't the decision maker.
Right.
So these waiver and like because whoever denied you is the waiver authority, I would assume. And that's
Yeah.
how you would even have to go back and be like, I guess so, because you even asked like, hey, what if I was desk only duty, and they were able to approve that.
Yeah.
So what I so often find it's the people who actually have the ability to do things who act like their hands are tied. Oh, I'm sorry, the regs say this.
No, there's always like it's all amount of like how you interpret it and uh who wants to take the risk. Um,
Oh, risk aversion, absolutely. Like they're not willing to.
yeah.
Like, let me pass it off to this guy. He might be
Yeah.
able to sign off on you. But like when you even get to that potato, they're like, well, that guy didn't sign off on you, so why would I sign off?
Right. It obviously means that something's wrong with you.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And that's not a
Uh,
military specific trait. I think it gets amplified because we are a no fail military. Um,
and
you
that's
you you
and not to say
can't.
that's uniquely military. I think it's worse in the military, but
Yeah, yeah. Um, but it was, yeah, it made no sense. No sense.
So, and yeah, we're talking about easily $2 million has been invested in you by Uncle Sam. And they say, no, we're not going to continue to get a return on an investment from that, even though he's very willing. He even wants, like, even willing to ride the desk, which a lot of pilots, CISOs, operators don't want to do. You were like,
Nope.
hey, no, I actually want the desk job. Put me in there. And
And
they're like,
this and the AFSC required 7 years of flying experience.
which there's not a, obviously that narrows down the list of potential applicants and candidates.
Right.
And there's like, nah, we don't need you. I wonder if that probably even had something to do with that AFSC folding. Is they probably? I wonder if they just didn't get enough applicants, qualified applicants for it.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been. It was always going to be a small AFSC, but every aviator that you keep in a plane is worth the investment. You know.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's it. It kills me. You know, I had to have multiple knee surgeries, and when I was trying to get back in and get the waiver for that, and I would get people who wouldn't. They would have, one iota of the situation. Be like, well, you have to understand things from their perspective. They don't want to have to bring you back in and then pay for your knee problems later on. I'm like, you don't understand. I had my knee problems because of and while I was in the Air Force, and they already paid for those surgeries. I already can file for disability on that. They're
Mm-hmm.
already on the hook for it. Me
Mm-hmm.
coming back in would just be a greater return on investment for Uncle Sam.
Yep. 100%.
Financial business sense be damned. So, uh, so yeah, I can't say I blame you for just being like, you know what, I'm done. And the fact that you went on to other organizations where you could see what real meritocracy looks like versus bureaucracy,
Yeah.
I can imagine it was all the more jarring in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing in my current position is airlines are incredibly lean. Um, the punishment for mistakes and for waste is severe. So, um,
Well, shoot, I mean, just a business. You're not going to waste money. Yeah,
well, even within the business world, I mean, we
sure.
posted an 11% profit last year. It's one of the highest profitable years. Like we were the most profitable American or airline in the United States last year at only 11%.
And see, I am by no means a business person, so I have no frame of reference for this. But
Well, for example, the credit card companies were recently in a Senate hearing committee meeting about how exorbitant their fees are getting, and they claim that they are hitting roughly 50% profit. Now,
got it.
granted, that's the other end of the extreme, but everybody else falls in between there.
Sure, but yeah, no, that gives me some opposite frame of reference. Yeah. So I'm curious. You had started to talk to me about some of the other sad stories that you'd seen during your service time. Um, can we get into those a little bit? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and
So
this is somewhat of a jump, obviously from direct like your story, but this isn't hearsay. You were directly witness to these events.
yeah, yeah. These were my friends that I served with. Not a story that was told to me. This is
Right.
the stuff that they told me about their lives. So I had one friend that um, was accused by his commander at the academy his senior year, and if you make it past your sophomore year, you owe 2 years to the Air Force. So as soon as you step into class that first day of your junior year, you're committed to the Air Force one way or the other.
Right.
So this is now his senior year. He gets accused by his commander of fraternization based on a freshman, an underclassman, female, who he had texted. There was a text chain was the supposed evidence, and that was it. There was no one-on-one time spent. It was always in groups. So anytime that
Okay.
he was with this female cadet, he was with other cadets. There was never any
Okay.
one-on-one time. Okay. This cadet was under his charge. She was in his organization, his flight, and so it was his responsibility to maintain the morale and welfare of his troops.
Yeah.
And so
Like you're
he,
actually taught to do.
yeah, and so he took his troops out for dinner a couple of times, or took them out for a hike on the academy grounds because it's right there at the mountains. It's beautiful. In between that and the texting, his commander accused him of fraternization, inappropriate relationship. He was asked point blank, "Are you having an inappropriate relationship with this female cadet?" And he said no. The commander, who is the sole investigating and deciding authority on this topic, found him or essentially charged him and found him guilty of fraternization. No trial or anything. This is just commander's discretion.
Right.
And then slapped him with an honor violation because the commander was then accusing my friend of lying about it because he was asked the direct question of, "Are you having an inappropriate relationship?" Once the commander had defined that yes, he was, the follow-up was the honor violation, and that's what got him kicked out.
Which, again, for viewers' reference here, at a service academy, so like the Naval Academy at Annapolis, Military Academy at West Point, Air Force Academy here in Colorado Springs, you do have the honor code for cadets, which is we will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate among us anyone who does. So his air officer commanding AOC was accusing him of violating the honor code by lying, even though he was attesting to, no, I was not fraternizing with a freshman.
Right.
And I feel like that's somewhat more common knowledge as far as fraternization, but like in the military, fraternization would be of a higher ranking person having an inappropriate relationship with a lower ranking person. And they very much simulate that. It's in active duty military, it's very much around officers interacting with enlisted, and they somewhat simulate that at service academies with upperclassmen and freshmen. So for everyone's reference there.
Yeah.
So, and it's even such a improper procedure that his accuser was also hit the judge and jury on the verdict.
Right.
So, which gives you an idea of military justice. It's not exactly often a due process by any means. I'm even more surprised though. Was this before I mean, honor boards I thought were something that were much more extensive and is actually very much a due process. So what if he accused him of an honor violation? Did he not go through a whole honor board?
No, he did. And the honor board found him guilty because they
How?
have to assume that the frat hit is legit.
Why do they have to assume that?
Because that's already, like, if you look at like a due process, right? That's already established. Like the honor board
it wasn't a due process. So like basically he had a conviction.
Yeah, but that's outside the scope of the honor board. Honor board only looks at honor hits. They don't look at frat hits. They don't look at commander's decisions. They don't look at any of that. So they have to assume that the frat hit is legit.
I question the whole have to assume component. That's
they're not the honor board is not looking at was this a frat hit or not. They're looking at did he lie or not.
right. But the only way you can determine if he lied or not is if the frat is legitimate. It's not like this is a great mental leap to get there.
Yeah. But I think they were essentially told, like, you have to assume that the frat hits. I'm assuming here that part is here.
No, I mean, I feel like that's a valid assumption on your part. There's no way they weren't told that.
Yeah. So, yeah, he got booted, went back home. A couple years later, got a letter saying, "Here's your enlistment date," and had to go back and serve 2 years as a senior airman, I think.
I hope he, landed on his feet and ended up having a good job that way. He sounds, I mean, I have no idea who, I don't know this guy, but it sounds like he was a good dude if he was actually just trying to take care of his guys.
He was phenomenal. He was, he pissed me off all the time. He was the dude that would eat nothing but Doritos and Dr. Pepper and score a 450 on his PT test.
God.
450
But
out of 500. Like,
yeah, I'd say the cadet uh, physical fitness test at service academies is pretty freaking rough, and it's on a 500 point scale. So if you could get
250 is,
450,
yeah.
um,
And
I, I,
250 is
I
passing.
yeah, I think my best ever was a 412.
Yeah.
Like, and that was yeah, uh, that was an anomaly for me, unfortunately.
No, he was
So,
a great dude. Absolute beast. Last time I talked to him, yeah, he's landing on his feet. But, he did
but
his 2 years and then moved on with his life and now has like nothing but bitterness in his mouth about the whole thing.
understandably, just that alone, the whole like, oh, you have to assume the conviction is legitimate is that's even undue influence uh, for them to just say like, you have to assume this.
There's a
Uh,
lot. There's a lot wrong with the honor process at the
and
academies. I love the intent. The intent's
right, I
great.
love the intent, but even then, before that, there was obviously no due process whatsoever. That was a tyrant being tyrannical. I think you were fraternizing, therefore you were fraternizing. That's all that came down to.
Yeah. And UCMJ is weird. The commanders need a lot of power to be able to
Sure.
do what they're expected to do. But it only really highlights the need for really great people to be in command. And
Well, exactly. A dictatorship's a great system so long as you have a benign dictator.
yeah,
How often does that
um,
happen?
and the military is not a democracy. We defend democracy, Um,
Right. So I'm not trying to say that everything needs to be exactly like civilian, but my point is that's such an example of where it can go wrong and
yeah,
horribly wrong.
and it did. And it did. And my other friend is the same thing. Of a commander going horribly wrong. Um, and this was at CISO school. His roommate brought material that was marked classified, but it was not
Simulated
real
classified.
information. Yeah, it wasn't simulated classified. It was marked actually classified, secret.
Okay.
But the information on it was not true,
Okay.
if that makes
So
sense.
but I guess like it wasn't truly classified material and it wasn't marked simulated classified, but it was a simulation of classified, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, um, that's pretty close.
Okay.
So, uh, his roommate, like it somehow got out that his roommate had brought back this material to the room.
Because they were instructed not to take this material home, regardless
Oh
of
yeah,
whether real or not.
you can't take it from the vault. That was the rule.
Got it.
Um, and those are our first introduction to classified material, and they were very strict about it. And pilots don't get access to classified material during UPT. Like
Oh,
their
okay.
first introduction is in their ops unit.
Sure.
Um,
Okay. Which
CISOs
I
get that early.
I was in Intel school, so everything was
Everything
yeah.
is yeah. So yeah, we got that early. We got about halfway through is when you start dealing with secrets. So uh Commander comes in to my buddy's apartment. They say, "Hey, we know that you've got classified material here. Um, where is it?" And my friend goes, "I don't know what you're talking about." And
Because
the
did he truly not know
no,
like that?
he
Okay.
didn't have a clue. Um, he was pretty quiet dude. Kept to himself. Went
Yeah.
to and Civil School keeps you busy. So if he wasn't at the squadron, he was in his room,
Okay.
and that was about it. Um, he Commander starts and the command staff start rummaging around the apartment and find classified material and kick both of them out.
Because right as soon as they found it, like he was uh guilty by association isn't even necessarily the right word, but just assumed like, oh, you had to have known about this.
Yeah, how do you not know that your roommate is bringing home classified material? It's like because I don't go through my roommate's stuff.
Right.
It's a pretty
Especially
easy. That's a
especially I
pretty
mean
easy.
especially because I mean the dynamic of roommates can vary. Sometimes your roommate's your best friend, sometimes it's just like you
You're
you
there.
just live in the same vicinity. That's it. Like yeah.
Um, yeah, so luckily for him, he got an admin discharge, so it's not showing up on his record.
Okay.
I don't believe it came across as honorable, so he's got his benefits and everything. But man, that wrecked him. I mean, he was a classmate of ours at the academy.
Okay, and I
Um,
was about to ask. So he's an academy grad. So again, there's another $400,000 investment that's just booted.
yep.
Um,
Um,
and I totally get that you have to come down hard on someone bringing classified material, even if it's not legitimately classified. But like that's, I would argue that's the entire purpose of a training environment. The guy who brought home that should have absolutely been reamed. But even I don't, me personally, I don't even think he should have been kicked out. I think he should have been severely reprimanded so that way he actually learns while in training, so that way he doesn't do it in an operational environment.
there was a high degree of malice in that case. They were very clear. Do not bring home material. Check your pockets. Check your bags. Like it was
Malice.
it was very clear. He was knowingly, willingly, and repeatedly violating the rules.
Okay.
So he earned a boot, 100%. Like the
Okay.
instructions were very very clear about how to handle this material correctly,
Okay.
and it wasn't one of those cases of like, ah, crap. I put this thing in my backpack as I was going from one classroom to another, and now I'm home and I realize it. And I'm gonna race back to the squadron and lock it up.
No, and that to me, I think should increase the severity of the punishment that they gave him. I still don't
Yeah.
think that's necessarily separation worthy. But that's also, I very much see this trend in the military of the zero tolerance Air Force,
Yeah.
where a lot of times it's not necessarily zero tolerance. It's a lot of times stuff like that either just gets swept in the rug. Oh, this never happened,
Yeah.
or we're going to completely ruin your career over it, versus actually being able to punish someone. They learn a lesson and then they move on with their lives.
Yeah. Yep.
And we don't afford people a lot of chance to actually mess up and learn, to actually learn a lesson and develop. And especially again, this is a butter bar.
Yeah.
This is someone who is in a training environment. That is where you are supposed to mess up
Yep.
if you're going to at all. Um, by all means, mess up there. Don't mess up in the operational environment. And like I said, like it should have been like severe punishment. Like he should have like they should make him hate his life for breaking that type of rule.
Yeah.
But I
Or
think he
kick him
should
out
have
of
been
civil school. Go stick him in. Oh, you can't handle classified material. You're gonna go to services. Go
sure.
have fun being a services officer.
Yeah, you can hand out basketballs. That's fine.
Yep.
Like to me, that would almost that would be again not only like that is a punishment, but at least then the Air Force is still getting something out of that investment as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, could be philosophical difference. I think the rest of his character, etc., could determine whether what type of job he get or punishment he got. But I
But
don't think separation was the appropriate action.
and going after the roommate,
No,
like,
right. And so that's just dealing with him going after the roommate who is honestly innocent bystander. Like that's talk about limiting civilian casualties, collateral damage. Like
yeah,
no, they just blew up his life for no reason
yeah,
other than being indiscriminate and vindictive.
yeah. And it's a bad decision. It's a bad decision from top to bottom.
And so the reason I bring up these stories is I do think some people be like, oh, you don't air out your family's dirty laundry, but there's also very much the sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, and it's interesting, like the trust in the military um, is at historic lows
Hmm.
recently. And this is even without the public knowing some of these stories. I think some of it is growing. Like we're very much an insular profession at this point, where military became very much a family business. So
Hmm.
family members of service members would hear these types of stories. But I feel like a lot of the civilian population writ large is unaware of this. And I'm even almost at the opposite end. I'm very much from a military family. I grew up always imagining I would do something in the military. I always wanted to serve. Had an extraordinarily high opinion of service members across the board.
Yeah.
let alone, okay, higher ranking officers. I would have assumed there's actually, you know, uh, an increase in caliber and quality as you go up in the ranks. And that is not necessarily the case because, as you just said, like sometimes it's just a matter of time and service and you didn't get a DUI. Like, so therefore you're
Mhm.
promoted to the next level.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and keep in mind uh this is the same commander who the guy that kicked my buddy out for his roommate having secrets. Um he had a radius of like how far we could go with the plane,
Okay.
right? When we were doing like cross countries, right?
Yeah.
So you can only fly so far away. Okay, fine. The plane can go farther, but you're only going to go this far. Okay, fine. Whatever. Um, I was on a flight where he violated that, flew outside of his own radius that he had, so that he could drop off a package to his daughter at college.
So rules for thee, not for me.
Yep. And
Got,
that's just another indicator of his character.
yeah, I gotta
And
love
you know,
leadership.
yeah. And before I got out, I'm sure he hit 20 and retired, and now he gets to do whatever he's doing, but collecting a retirement check for it.
And so that gets into some of the other systemic issues with the military. I do think military justice is quite often isn't, and both those stories touch on that. And but even just to get in the military, I hear so many, like I said, other podcasts. I've heard news stories. I've read countless articles from military and army times across the years talking about how we have historically low recruiting numbers. There's only been one article I've ever seen that even started to address the waiver system and saying that, hey, the waiver system's actually blocking a lot of otherwise really qualified people.
Mm-hmm.
And just to kind of draw it back, that is a lot of the intent of this podcast is to bring up those types of stories. Um, it wasn't necessarily planned this way, but it seems fate that today, February 8th, is the anniversary of when I was supposed to ship for an 18 X-ray contract in the Colorado Guard exactly 4 years ago. So it seems fate that I'd finally pulled the trigger on making this conception come to a reality of starting this. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's an important message that people need to talk about because, especially even if there is a surge in recruiting, that's not going to make the waiver process get better. It's only going to make it get worse because they're going to say, oh, I don't, why do we need to take you? I've got 5 other people lined up at the door.
Yeah.
And that was all the more frustrating is that even during historic lows, you would still have this type of mentality of like, oh, we're not going to take you because you got airsick 8 years ago.
Yeah. We have
And
plenty of
that's
people.
what's that?
No. It's like, oh yeah, this mentality of like, oh, we got plenty of people. It's like, no, you
Yeah,
don't.
I think they were very much riding a culture and a mentality that was a wave from just the surge after like 9/11, post 9/11 recruiting. And it's
Yeah.
like that mentality never went away,
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what
which
it is. I don't have an explanation. I can see the problems, and I've seen how other industries have solved it. Um, there's uh I forget the author, but the book The Talent War is perfect for explaining what it's like on the outside and kind of having this combat mentality towards fighting over the best talent in the industry, like what's out there.
yeah,
Um,
I haven't heard of that.
and
I'll have to check it out.
yeah, it's a good book. Um, and the military doesn't fight the talent war, not even a little bit.
Right. Um, I kept hearing every excuse under the sun as far as why recruiting was low. And I'm not even going to get into the fact of like some people be like, oh, the military's so woke, it's this, it's that. And but I'm sure politics is always at play as far as who's joining and when they're joining. But what I never saw was the system saying it's our fault.
Hmm.
Never did I see ownership of the recruiting system, the accessions process, be like, we could actually improve our process and make things better. Never was that one of the things discussed in any of these articles.
Yep.
Because even the one article that was about the waiver system was an outside perspective analyzing. That was not an interior source.
Right.
So, and they just refused to address it. And it obviously, when you take no ownership, no responsibility, oddly enough, things don't get better.
Nope. Absolutely not.
With I even now see this with the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, in his book War on Warriors, talked extensively about how recruiting was low. But what I'm trying to bring to people's attention is that it's not just that less people are going to the recruiting office, it's that a lot of otherwise qualified, well-intentioned, red-blooded Americans who are trying to join for the right reasons are getting denied capriciously and even just laughably. You got airsick 8 years ago. Sorry, we can't take you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
it's worth highlighting. It's absolutely worth highlighting. It makes me laugh to even have a discussion about, oh, we need to have the military be merit, or the government be merit based. We need to go to merit. It's kind of the hot word of the day when
sure.
we're not even enforcing it now. We weren't enforcing it 5 years ago. Like, how are we going to have a discussion on merit when it's never been? We're not getting back to anything. It's never been a good enough practice.
Well, sure, but I mean, just to say that it's never been that way doesn't mean it can't or shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, that's true.
And so that's, I don't know, gives me uh, at least a sense of faint light hope optimism that hopefully doesn't just get extinguished with time. Because I do think I don't know, I like to consider myself forever the optimist. I try so hard to be.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have.
Yeah, you probably know that more than most people.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how you kept up with what you did. It's impressive.
Thanks for that. It's one of those things I would love to tell my story at some point. I'm sure if I were to talk about just even the accessions, that would take like at least 2 hours. So maybe in due time. Otherwise, I've just been kind of content to bring up some things that I relate to in other people's stories as we go along with this. So I think that probably kind of brings it to a nice closing there, is unless you've got anything else that you want to tie a bow on. So
no, man, I appreciate the opportunity to get my voice out, and get these stories out and add it to the total body of just people getting wronged by the system, unnecessarily.
and that's I thank you so truly, because when I even just texted you about this Addlebrain's scheme of like, hey, I think I'm have this idea of where I want to start a podcast of these types of stories, and I believe you said, "Oh brother, let's go." And
yeah, sounds right.
Yeah. So thank you for that and being willing to share these types of stories.
Absolutely.
All right. I'll see you everyone else on the next episode. Take care.
Cheers.